All right, so let's look at the bones of the anterior view of the skull. So the first bone we see is our frontal bone, and this is a large bone that is singular, so there's just one of them, and it curves underneath and forms a significant portion of the roof of the orbit of the eye. If we work our way inferiorly down the midline, we see our second pair of bones here. These are our nasal bones forming the proximal bridge of the nose. Working inferiorly again, you see a pair of bones that hold our upper row of teeth. We have a left and right maxilla. So maxilla here holding upper row of teeth. And laterally, you see our cheekbones, known as zygomatics, which is a word that literally means arch. So that's just a little arch there. Inside of the orbit, I want you to think about this like it's a room with a big window in the front. So to build our room, we've got to have a roof, which I already said was formed by the frontal bone. The floor is formed by two bones coming together. Our maxilla comes in and forms part of the floor, and our zygomatic bone forms the rest of the floor along with the lateral wall of the orbit. The medial wall of the orbit is a little complicated, and I'm going to hold this up so you can see some of the suture marks there. There are two bones that make up the medial wall of the orbit, so on the nose side. The posterior most one that's larger and kind of looks like a rectangle in shape is known as the ethmoid bone. So ethmoid. And the ethmoid is intimately associated with our nasal cavity. So that's why it's facing the nose side. And we build a lot of the face around it. Smaller and more anteriorly, there's an extra bone there in the orbit called the lacrimal bone. It's small, rectangular shaped, and it has an opening or foramen in it. This little lacrimal fossa and foramen is where our tear duct sits. So we call this the lacrimal bone because lacrimal is referring to tears. See that little hole there? So lacrimal bone, ethmoid bone, maxilla, zygomatic, frontal, and the posterior component of our orbit is made up of a bone that we're going to see from pretty much every perspective of the skull called the sphenoid. And the sphenoid, I'll do a whole video about, is a bone that basically is the cradle of the skull. We build the entire skull around it, the face, the cranial vault, the inferior base of the cranium. Laterally we see it. So sphenoid is a pretty important bone, and it forms the posterior wall of the orbit there.